and broadcast over Lunenburg Public Access. And I'm getting some feedback. I don't have the rebroadcast schedule right in front of me, but the broadcasts will be shown on public access cable at various times throughout the week and are available on YouTube. So it is 7:02. We have a quorum. I'll call our meeting to order. I'll start with communications. Any communications from the public before we get started? Okay. I have the latest issue of the Beacon, and I have a notice of public hearing from the Lunenburg Planning Board. They will hold a public hearing on April 13th, 2015 at 6:35 p.m. here at Town Hall to amend the zoning map 59, parcel 8, 790 to 792 Massachusetts Avenue, owner Edward H. Riley, Jr., 39 Pinnacle Road, Ellington, Connecticut, 06029, in map 59, parcel 9, 748 Massachusetts Avenue, owner Stone Farms Estates Condominium, 748 Mass Ave, Lunenburg, from commercial to limited business / residential. Copies are on file in the planning office, and notice of said hearing will be duly posted. Any other communications from the committee? Okay. Tonight is our official public hearing of the budget. We started our process actually a little bit late this year. We had a couple of snow events, and that led us to begin the budget season with the town manager's preliminary recommendations on Tuesday, February 24th. Since then, we've been meeting just about weekly to review the various departmental budgets and hear from the department heads what the level of service is that we're able to provide with the budget as recommended and where there are gaps in those service levels. We've heard from all the departments now. We've also had some adjustments in terms of a better fix on the governor's proposed budget and some other potential sources of revenue, as well as updates on some of the line item expenditures. So I've asked the town manager to summarize for us what those adjustments are. So we'll first look at the adjustments to revenue, and then we'll be looking at the adjustments to expenses. Once we're complete with that, I'll open up the floor first for questions, and then secondly for comments. So if anyone has any opinions to register with respect to the budget and adjustments that have been proposed, I would ask that you hold that until after we get through the questions. So clarifying questions first, and then any comments would follow that. So with that, I'll turn it over to Carrie Spidell, Town Manager.
Okay, thank you. I think I probably should hold this. So as the chair said, we do have a number of adjustments to go through this evening. You know, what we do is throughout this process, we work with the document that's issued on February 15th. We hold all of the adjustments until the end of the process because I think it's easier rather than going back and forth and adding things and taking them out. So what I've done is I put together 2 slides for you. You have a copy of the handout. I'm not sure how easy it is to see these slides up on the wall, but it's the same information as the one-page handout that you have. There are a number of adjustments to revenue that are being presented this evening. The most exciting one, I think, is the change in new growth. The original estimate of new growth for fiscal 16 was $175,000. That was something that was provided by the assessor. Last week, I mentioned to him that I needed to finalize, put the final touches on the fiscal 16 budget, and I wanted him to take another look at it and confirm that number. And he said he would get back to me by the beginning of this week, and I was very surprised when Tuesday afternoon he gave me a letter and said that new growth would be $320,000. So that's $145,000 higher than what was originally projected. And this really just has to do with increased residential growth. There isn't any significant project that is associated with this. So that is good news, and the result of that is when we get through all of this, there is some what I called surplus that is available to be appropriated or recommended to be appropriated to some other need within the budget. The next series of adjustments all have to do with the governor's budget. We've talked about this before, but I will go through them again. And I have taken the governor's projection for local aid one for one. So I've included everything that he's included. And I think with the exception of the 40S, which we'll talk about, I think they're probably very good numbers. So in terms of Chapter 70, which is our education aid, the governor's budget projected $90,809.56 higher than what I had included. Charter tuition reimbursements are $3,403.83. I'm going to skip over the 40S just for a minute. The school choice receiving tuition is $27,912 less than what I had included. The school lunch program, the reimbursement is completely eliminated, so that was a loss of $7,525. The unrestricted general government aid, or the lottery aid, was an increase of $33,875. Veterans benefits, an increase of $14,699. Exemptions, these are property tax reimbursement we receive for property tax exemptions that we provide through the assessor's office for certain categories of property owners, an increase of $1,736. And then the state aid to libraries, a decrease of $532. So back to the 40S education aid. I have included $116,000. The governor in his budget included $183,000, I believe $618. The reason I included 116 is because I met with the superintendent probably 10 days ago now and asked her to identify some one-time or non-recurring costs within the budget. She provided me with a list that totaled $116,000. It could go as high as $183, but because I only plugged in $116,000 worth of expenses, I'm only showing $116,000 worth of revenue. Now this aid, just to remind everybody, is the aid that we receive for increased educational expenses in our 40R development, which is Tri-Town Landing. This is aid that we have to apply for. The state has a formula where they compare the revenue generated from that 40R development versus the educational expenses, and the expenses over the revenue that is generated from that project. And it's really, they're looking at motor vehicle excise tax revenue for the most part. We receive that as aid. Whatever the delta is, we receive that as aid. But that's something we have to apply for. We apply within the fiscal year. So in September of fiscal 16, we will make application for these funds, and sometime between October and November, the state would let us know if we receive these funds. I'm sure you will recall that we received this funding for the first time in the current fiscal year, but it wasn't received in time for it to be appropriated in the fiscal 15 budget. So in fiscal 16, we're already carrying fiscal 15's payment. So this would be a second payment if we were to include it. And I'm not convinced that we will receive this. I've mentioned before, there are only 2 communities in the state that receive this funding. And I was advised by the Department of Revenue that this is something, because it only affects 2 communities, that it wouldn't be surprising if it wasn't included in the state's budget, which is why I suggested to the superintendent that let's match up some one-time expenses with this revenue. But if this revenue does not come in, I don't have any other source of funding to cover those expenses. And then there weren't any changes to local receipts, and there were a few changes to available funds. The first is I've included $50,000 in free cash to partially offset the deposit to the stabilization fund. In the original budget proposal, the only thing coming from free cash was that payment of 40S from the current fiscal year. This is tied to the fiscal 15 budget adjustment article, which we can talk about. But I believe there is $50,000 of free cash remaining after we make budget adjustments in fiscal 15 that we could use to apply to the fiscal 16 budget, but we apply it to a non-recurring expense, which would be to partially offset the deposit to the stabilization fund. Unexpended articles, there is a decrease of $4,303.81. These are typically the old capital articles. When the projects are done, sometimes there's a remaining amount, and we pull that into the budget to be reappropriated to offset capital. So there was an adjustment of what will actually be available versus what was projected. The next is a small increase in the school transportation offset of $690. So we are able to use 100% of the collections of the prior year to help offset, as an estimate to help offset the following year. So we collected $690 more than the original estimate in fiscal 15, so we can use 100% of that in fiscal 16. And that's what that increase represents. And then the final item is $13,919 from the Sewer Enterprise Fund. And we've been going through a process with the Sewer Enterprise Fund where to meet state requirements, we have some offsets. We have some services and some salaries I'll stick with services first. We have some services that the general fund provides to the enterprise fund, and we charge for those. And that has always been included as an offset. What we haven't done in the past is 15% of the DPW director's salary is charged directly to the enterprise fund. And the new accounting requirement is that 100% of that be charged to the general fund, and we increase the indirect offset by that same amount. So there's an increase of $13,919 in revenue, and there will be the same offsetting expense. And that's an accounting requirement. So we have a net revenue adjustment or net revenue increase of $429,858.17. And I can pause there to see if there are any questions.
Any questions from the committee? John?
I actually do. The last explanation you had for the $13,919 is the result of an accounting adjustment that it sounds like there will be a zero net increase after all the dust settles. Am I wrong with that?
You are not wrong. You are right.
Okay, then the follow-up question, if I may, is that is included in the net revenue adjustment.
Yes.
Is that correct?
Yes, it is.
Okay. I'm having trouble connecting dots.
Okay.
If there's a zero net increase because of the accounting adjustment, which I get, how could that translate into what is in effect a 13,000 net increase in the revenue?
Well, I have to increase my revenue, but then I also increase my expense.
So I'm reading half of the story. Thank you.
Stay tuned.
I will have my undivided attention.
Other questions? I have just a couple. What's the confidence level with the assessor's new estimate of new growth? Or is that even a consideration?
He is extremely confident.
Okay. The governor released additional Chapter 90 funds for fiscal 15.
Yes.
Do we have any assumptions with respect to fiscal 16 in Chapter 90? Or are we going with whatever numbers were in your original assumptions?
Well, we don't appropriate Chapter 90. It's not part of this budget. And I don't yet have any indication on what the governor will do. But just to refresh everybody's memory, we originally received in the current fiscal year $420,461. We appropriated ourselves $241,490 for a total budget for road expenditures for fiscal 15 of $661,951. And then when the new governor took office, he released that additional Chapter 90, so that brought our Chapter 90 appropriation up to $630,692, which was an increase of about $210,000. And then we also just received word that for the second year in a row, although it's called something different, the purpose is the same, we're receiving money for pothole repair, $63,069. So we have a significant amount of money in fiscal 15 for road work.
Okay, thank you. And with respect to the 40R amount, in this current revenue projection, there's 116K, but in the governor's budget, as much as 183?
Yes.
So is there some upside as well as some potential downside? I mean, if the funding gets cut, the 116 goes away.
Right.
But if it gets fully funded, would we be eligible for as much as 183,000?
Yes. Yes, and the reason I just included the 116 is because that's what was identified to me as one-time costs. And I'm comfortable saying if there are one-time costs and you want to put those expenses towards this revenue, that I think is an okay thing to do. But it can't, I can't put 183,000 in and 116 in expenditures, and because I didn't have more than 116 in expenditures, I didn't put it in.
Right. Oh, so that nets out much like the budget adjustment that John was asking about.
In part two, yeah.
Okay. Any other clarifying questions with respect to revenues? Okay.
So then expenditures, and this slide is even worse, so don't even look at the back wall. You won't be able to read it. So I went back through the budget and made some adjustments to expenditures. I've identified these by grouping. We'll start with general government. Registrations and census, $9,000. For whatever reason, and I'm embarrassed to say that is for salary that's always been in the budget, and it was not in the original recommendation. Also in general government, in conservation, in bridge repair and maintenance, I'm eliminating $6,000 that was included in the budget. This is for work to be done at the Lane property to meet one of the grant requirements, and it should be paid out of that warrant article rather than the operating budget. So it's not that we're not doing it, we're just, it's already been included as part of the warrant article to purchase that property. In public safety, our Neshoba Valley Regional Dispatch District assessment, the executive director, after the budget, my recommendation was issued, requested a 2.5% increase in the assessment, so I've included that. We have not had an increase in that assessment for the 2 years that we've been a part of it, so a 2.5% increase seemed to be reasonable. I could take this opportunity to go on record and let everybody know that the Town of Bolton Board of Selectmen took a vote, an affirmative vote, a week or maybe 2 ago at this point, to request membership in the Neshoba Valley Regional Dispatch District. And so we expect to have a new member beginning officially July 1st, 2016, which is fiscal 17, so it won't impact this budget. They will likely come on board sometime at the beginning of calendar 16, so we may end up receiving a credit in fiscal 16, but nothing that we can plan. And the way that district is set up, each member, regardless of the volume they bring to the district, they pay an equal share of the assessment. So I do expect that we potentially will have a slight increase in staff, a slight increase in the operating expense of the district, but I also believe that that will result in a decrease in our assessment, because it will be a slight increase and we will be dividing the pie by another member. It also wouldn't surprise me if before Bolton comes on, it wouldn't surprise me if the town of Berlin also requested membership, because those two communities work cooperatively on a number of ventures, and they did both study the feasibility of having a regional dispatch district, just the two communities, and the town of Berlin really is in honestly tougher shape than Bolton. So I do expect that after they go through their process and due diligence, that they may also come on. Then the next section is education. Lunenburg Public Schools, I've increased the expenditure by that $690, which is from the school transportation fees. I've also increased it by the $116,000, which is the 40S. And then the Monty Tech assessment by $62,237. And this is the actual assessment. You may recall that we did not even have an estimated assessment when the budget was put together back in February. And we received the actual assessment recently, which includes the addition of 7 students at Monty Tech. Item 7 in the Department of Public Works, the director's salary, I mentioned that, there's the $13,919. Then in facilities, just a line item adjustment to add $13,000 to electricity and take $13,000 from natural gas. In recycling, a slight increase to 2 of our assessments for our household hazardous waste program, and also our Mass Toss, which is our recycling collaborative. And then the big decrease in expenses there, $47,754, is for the recycling program. We have a 2-part program. We have a pay-per-throw solid waste program, which is an enterprise fund, fully self-supporting. None of that expense is shown in the operating budget. We also have a recycling program that we make available to all households, and that is paid 100% by the operating budget. We have 1 contractor. We are in the middle of a 10-year contract. We've spent a lot of time trying to figure out which costs we should apportion to each program, because we have a contract. We tried really hard to get the the vendors to bid on recycling and pay per throw, so it would be easier for us to apportion the costs. That didn't happen, and we've gone through several adjustments to this program. The town accountant has put a lot of time and effort into this, and we feel we're actually back to where we were a few years ago in terms of costs. We feel that the general fund has been overpaying for the program. So we have a new model that we're working with, and feel comfortable with that, and have had enough experience with the bills to feel comfortable with that. So that's a significant decrease in cost to the general fund. Veterans benefits, I've increased the appropriation by $32,500. We have a significant increase in veterans benefits that we have been paying out. We started seeing that maybe at the second half of fiscal 14. They've been consistently high through fiscal 15. Although we only know what has been approved through the end of fiscal 15, we expect that we're, at least maybe for the first half of 16, we're going to be carrying some of these expenses. Generally, the veterans benefits expenses that we pay, they're temporary benefits to eligible veterans. Sometimes they're for veterans that are unemployed. Sometimes they are for veterans that are in the process of applying for permanent disability or permanent benefits through the VA, and the town is responsible for the temporary benefits. We do receive a 75% reimbursement from the state in the following year, which is why you saw an increase in revenues in veterans benefits, because we paid out more in 14 than we had in prior years. So, I mean, in 15 than in prior years. So we receive an increased payment from the state. Then the next section are all adjustments to cherry sheet charges based on the governor's budget. And I will just pull out, really, the only one that really needs to be talked about is the choice tuition assessment. That is an increase of $82,688. The way the assessments are shown for choice and charter is the first budget, the governor's budget, typically the budget that gets approved by the state will carry the prior year's assessment. So the prior year, which is fiscal 15, that assessment is being carried in fiscal 16. But when we talk about the budget adjustment article, the budget that was appropriated is still carrying fiscal 14, so we have to make up that adjustment. But when I put this budget together, I included the current year fiscal 15 assessment, which was too low. The other adjustments are small amounts. The one adjustment that the one charge that the governor included that I am not including his number is for the mosquito control district. He included a number, I think that was about $8,000 less than the budget that we receive from the mosquito control district. So I'm not sure why there's a difference, but I've never known the budget that we receive from the mosquito control district to be anything but 100% accurate. So I wanted to carry the higher number because that seemed to make the most sense. Then item 21, unclassified health insurance, an increase of $49,341. That is based on our actual premium renewal. We had carried an estimate of I'm not sure if it was 6 or 7%. Now the actual renewal is 10.9%. And this is, our health insurance is two parts. We have the insurance for active employees, which renews July 1st, and then insurance for retirees who are on Medicare plans, so not early retirees, but traditional aged retirees. That renews on January 1st. So this reflects the 10.9% renewal for active employees and early retirees, and I'm still carrying 6 or 7% for retirees for January 1st. Cherry sheet offsets a decrease of $35,970. This one is kind of tricky because we receive in the revenue, the library, the revenue we receive for the library, they give it to us as a revenue, and then they immediately take it away as an offset. So this actually is good, because I had proposed higher offsets originally. And then the last three are related to warrant articles. Prior year expense of $1,781.93. We have 3 prior year bills that have been identified. 2 are medical bills, and 1 is an office supply bill. So those need to be paid for. The next item is $2,500. The original amount I had included for the police detail revolving account was $7,500. It should have been $10,000, and that is part of a collective bargaining agreement. So that was a mistake on my part. And then the last is an increase of $9,922.65 to the stabilization fund to account for this additional expenditure that's being proposed, to maintain the stabilization fund at the 5% balance. So the total increased expenditures are $300,280.10, leaving a surplus of $129,578.
Questions on the adjustments to expenditures? John?
Actually, I do. See, Monty Tech, just a difference in what, when Monty Tech made their presentation, they told us that it would cost, incremental cost be about $10,200 or so dollars per student for the 7 additional students. It's actually costing us $63,000 for the 7 additional students, or a little less than $9,000 a student. I just wondered, has their cost per student for us gone down? Or am I missing something?
The number that I'm carrying here is the assessment they provided, which is what they presented. One other item, you may recall, in fiscal 15, when Monty Tech came and presented the fiscal 15 budget, they talked about a one-time, my recollection is it was a one-time adjustment to fiscal 14 based on how their aid from the state worked out. We paid that assessment, that additional assessment, even though it was fiscal 14, Monty Tech allowed their member communities to pay in 15, but we paid in 14. We made that budget adjustment in 14. So when I started with the original projection for fiscal 16, I used fiscal 15 because it was presented as a one-time adjustment. Mm-hmm. And what I heard when they presented, it was not a one-time adjustment. It was added to our base, yeah. And then our base was increased. Mm-hmm. And so maybe that's, so you can't, I don't think you can necessarily divide that just by 7, okay. And that's the cost per student.
Apt comparison. All right. It's a small item, but the veterans benefits, this centers on the 75% reimbursement by the state, yeah. In the succeeding fiscal year. Is there a way that we can attenuate the effects of that, maybe with an accounting entry, in that seems to me that that actually could exacerbate the year-to-year swings, and here's how. You have a year where we have a lot of veteran benefits. In the succeeding year, we get 75% of those paid for. But in the succeeding year, maybe we have less veteran benefits, and so it works in our favor. But then the year after that, if we have a lot of veterans benefits again, we're driven down. So I just wondered if there's a way to smooth that out a little bit.
I wish there were. I'm not aware that there is. But it is a big problem, especially when the reimbursement is low and the expenses are high. It would be nice if there was a way to account for it all within the same year, but I wasn't sure Karen was here.
Okay. All right.
While we're on that, what's the underlying assumption for the $32,500 budgeted in fiscal 16? Do we have some reason to believe that it's going to be higher than it's been in the past?
Let me just flip to my spreadsheet. So I included 50,000 in the adjusted budget for 16. I wanted to go back and refresh my memory. We're looking at about $78,000 worth of expenses in fiscal 15 based on what we've paid to date and what we know has already been approved. So I put in 50. And it's really, it's sort of a gut feeling because we don't have any data on what's been approved in the following fiscal year. But I think I've mentioned to you before that within, maybe in fiscal 14, I did a survey of the area communities to see what they had been paying because I was surprised we went for so many years where our $15,000 or $17,500 budget was really high. We weren't paying anything. And I was surprised to find that the area communities were paying between $50,000 and $100,000 regularly in benefits. And I was wondering why we hadn't seen that. And now we're seeing it. So I hate to overcompensate there, but 17.5 isn't going to cut it anymore. And so I picked 50.
Just one question. In the warrant articles, and this may be the wrong time to ask this, but do your current expenditures take into account the collective bargaining agreements?
The way we do that is we have a salary reserve account and we make an estimate of what we think it will cost to settle whatever is outstanding. So it's in the salary reserve account, which gets appropriated as part of the budget.
Okay.
And then when the contract is settled, town meeting has to approve the transfer from the salary reserve into whatever department.
Okay, so it's accounted for.
It is accounted for.
Any other questions on the adjustments to expenditures? Any questions from the public? Mr. Luck?
Carl Luck, 50 Sunset Lane. Just clarification on the $116,000 40S money. I think I heard that was non-recurring expenses. So I assume that means it doesn't go into the budget. So it wouldn't be part of the base budget next year, or would it?
I did identify it as a separate line, and I would request that it be appropriated separately so it's not part of the budget, similar to what we did maybe back in fiscal 12 when we appropriated an additional line both for schools and for the other town departments for extraordinary unemployment expenses. We had that called out separate, so it doesn't get built into the base. It doesn't get confused. It's completely separate.
So in
Thank you.
effect, we would treat it as a one-time revenue, one-time expense.
Okay. And then the only other clarification is, and maybe it's a question for later, I don't know the whole process here, but is it reasonable to assume then that whatever that gets spent on is costs that do not have to occur in FY16, that could be the next year or whatever, but if that money goes away, then those cost elements, whatever they are, hopefully we hear what they are at some point, are also not needed for 16. Is that part of the definition?
Either not acquired or acquired through some other means,
Or, yeah, right.
one-time expense.
Yeah, through some other means, if there's other funding somewhere or whatever. But the intent would be if the money went away, there are things that are of such a category or such a nature that they could be delayed out of FY16.
The conversation I had with the superintendent, I suggested that she identify additional capital, non-recurring expenses, one-time expenses, and I left it to her discretion to determine what those were. We had a conversation about them, the things that she identified. I'm not going to say they are in any way, shape, or form not needed, but they are expenses that do not occur on a regular basis. And she's here if she wants to address that as well.
Would you care to comment further, Ms. Combs?
I can clarify. The items that were identified are textbook adoptions, the replacements of the AP textbooks at the high school that are over 10 years old, that are mandated for us to replace if we're going to continue to offer that AP class. There were a few pieces of furniture. It was a classroom desk for students, replacement of those that are aged and decrepit that Mr. Londa had recommended at the primary school that we need to replace. So those are all the items. They're all clearly identified within the budget. We talked about them when I made the presentation. We'll talk about it at the budget hearing again on April 1st for the school's budget hearing, which is next Wednesday. And those were the items. And those shelf lives, if you will, are 5 to 10 years at a minimum. So, okay.
Thank you. Any other clarifying questions? It would appear there are none. So at this point, I'll open the floor to comments with respect to the budget as a whole, or any of the adjustments that have been proposed. And I'll open it up to the public.
I'm not speaking. I'm just going to move this to make it easier for people.
Clear the deck. Comments from the committee? Oh, Ms. Combs, please.
Since we're talking about adjustments, one thing that I wanted to have the opportunity to bring before this committee's attention, and once again, we'll talk about it next week, but while Chapter 70 increased $90,000, one of the things that didn't increase, in fact, was completely eliminated, was the kindergarten grant program. That was a state program. The Lunenburg Public Schools received $47,000 in grant monies. It was what was allocated this year. 9 C cuts removed $10,000 of those, so we ended up with 36. But all of those costs, which were related to paraprofessional salary, or a portion of a paraprofessional salary, a portion of kindergarten teacher's salary. And we have full-time kindergarten. Those are what the grants were put in place to support, the state grants. Those were all moved back into our budget. So our level service budget increased as a result of needing to absorb those costs. And those don't appear on the cherry sheets because those were state grants outside. But I just want to make sure that this committee's aware of it as you play Solomon and decide what, if anything, you'll do with that surplus that's been identified, and remind you of the students that are in the classrooms with 27 and 28 students, and that's one of our highest priorities. That's where we would have directed that money if it was available to us, is to lower that class size down to 22. Thank you.
Thank you. Comments from the committee? Or, I'm sorry, Ms. Bertram?
I just had some comments relative to the potential surplus, or the surplus. In attending, as you guys all have heard, there's a number of need across the board. Everyone needs funding. But I just kind of want to do a plug. The police department, there's several programs in the police department that are not funded simply because there wasn't availability. The Narcan and Quick Clot program, which was a very small dollar program, it was $3,353, which is what the police chief had requested. These are life-saving programs. I mean, these are things that truly can save a life. And as was articulated in his presentation, there have been instances where Narcan could have been administered and saved life. In the Quick Clot instance, there was a situation in which he went over, in which that would have been very helpful. Luckily, that individual did happen to survive, but it would have been, he nearly bled to death. So these are things that our police department should have with them when they respond to calls. They are the first responders, and we're talking about $3,000. The other thing that, he mentioned was CPR training, and we all saw the importance of CPR training for police officers, and that was recommended at $8,295. The other thing that I want to mention, and I actually, it's a question, is the vehicle maintenance line item in the police fire within the DPW budget. In fiscal 14, according to the DPW presentation, they were over by $7,352. In fiscal 15, there's a projected deficit of $14,539. So I'm just questioning, and those line items within the budget right now are level funded. So that's a concern for me, is there a potential deficit? Why has there been a deficit for the last couple of years? And can we see that going forward? And then the last thing I wanted to mention is, and this is something that we don't know what the expenses are going to be, but there's $40,000 in the budget for stormwater. I did just attend, along with Phyllis Luck, we attended a seminar yesterday on stormwater. And EPA indicated yesterday that we can most likely see those new regulations this summer. So just to keep in mind that those new regulations will come with stringent requirements that will be very high in cost. I think the DPW director talked about potentially anywhere from $250,000 to $500,000, depending on what those requirements are. So there is talk. The board had a joint meeting with the planning board and the conservation and the DPW, and we're looking at a stormwater utility. But that was the focus of yesterday's conference, was on creating a stormwater utility and how you do that. But just keep in mind that that stormwater line item is going to go up in the future. As to when, nobody can predict.
Thank you.
When discussing what to do around the surplus, I guess the other thing I just wanted to take a look at was that, again, the new growth number is a number that would be recurring, so we would, that then becomes part of our tax base. So that if we're looking at increasing any operating expenses, that's where that would be a number to look at, to consider as a base for that.
That would add to the base, yes. That would add to the levy going forward.
Okay.
So that would be a recurring revenue.
Okay. And the other question, actually, I have, and since it's not here, because it's part of the 2015 costs, I guess if the snow removal budget, because we were overspent, and if there's a potential that there could be a reimbursement up to the amount of $228,000, that would be seen or known never? When?
So just 1 minute on that. We put in for reimbursement, or we had to identify costs for all 4 storms, the 4 major storms that occurred this past winter. The first storm has been already certified as we received or we incurred in the region, met a certain threshold worth of expenses collectively, so that's eligible for federal reimbursement, that first storm. The other 3 storms, we are awaiting to hear whether or not they will be considered by FEMA for reimbursement. But even the first storm, even though it's been certified and eligible for reimbursement, it's not yet approved for reimbursement. And we don't have a timetable for when that decision will be made on whether it's approved for reimbursement and or whether the other 3 storms will be included as well. So I don't see that within yet this fiscal year that we will know whether or not we will receive that reimbursement. Okay. Legislation has been filed. I'm not sure the status of it because it's not the way we operate, but the legislation has been filed to allow to carry that deficit for 2 years, to amortize it over 2 years. Right now, we have the authority to carry it into the next fiscal year, but we have a practice here that we pay for it within the same fiscal year. So if we receive reimbursement, it will likely occur in fiscal 16, and we will likely have paid for it in fiscal 15, so whatever reimbursement we receive will become part of free cash. There's no way, and believe me, I twisted the town accountant's arm, there's no way to set up a liability for those expenses and hold it in if we receive the reimbursement, have the reimbursement hit the expenses directly.
Thank you.
John?
I would just like to put in a suggestion for some of the surplus, as it were, going to increase our snow and ice budget, because it seems like the last several years we've sort of underfunded that. I keep hearing the fact that the 4 snowiest winters in the Boston area occurred in the last 20 years, which is kind of a trend. And so when we couple those 2 together, if we underfund snow and ice routinely, we tend to kid ourselves.
Agreed. I think that's certainly something we need to consider here. Mr. Luck.
Carl Luck again. I just want to make a few comments. First, make it clear that I think one of the most important things as a society, and certainly as a town, is our children in the schools. So I don't want anything to be misinterpreted that any way against the schools or properly investing in the schools. And I think we should squeeze every dollar we can out of what we get for the kids to get good value education. It is, however, 60% of of where our taxes go, and when the school comes online, it's going to be 70%. So that's why I'm focused on it, because if you're going to try to look for places, you look at the big items, and that's the school. One thing in the process, just for a process comment, that is seems a little upside down, is the school budget that is now on the table just came out and was discussed for the first time last night. And just became available to the public. And I haven't even, and I thank the school committee and Loxie for making that available. I have the files, and I need to do my homework, but it's hard to have meaningful comments on that tonight. The other half of the process that's kind of upside down is the hearing on the schools, that when you could ask the questions, is tomorrow night after your hearing. So it's a little difficult to really, dig into any kind of details because we don't have the information yet, or the ability to have the exchange. So it's got a little flat-footed. But I do know, based on what I've looked at on the prior budget, and now what I'm looking at here of the level-funded budget, that's still, I think, $80,000 or so, even with the $116,000, which does disappoint me a little, because going in, I thought it was exactly the right approach with that. This year's 40S funding was to use last year's this year's next year, so that you're always sure what you've got before you spend it. I understand, and I applaud Carrie for trying to find ways to help the school system out, and that's great, and I'm sure it will. But it's a step in, I think, the wrong direction, for the right reason, but the wrong direction. I do honestly believe, from glancing at the budget, that the school can get what it needs within the dollar figure that the town is giving them, especially with this $116,000, including the new teachers to address the class size, which seems to be the number one. And I think it is, and I think I hear that it is, getting the class sizes in line is number one to get those teachers. I personally think, and I would love to work with whoever to find a way to do that within what the town can afford. The last comment I'll make is it does bother me a little bit, because again, last year I was very positively impressed by this committee's position that you use one-time money for one-time things and not recurring things. And I was disappointed to learn that middle of this year, the school used what I define as one-time savings from SPED to put in place a program with recurring costs, which quite frankly is part of the problem this year. I don't know if they had to make a decision today to get those two teachers or to put that program in place, what the decision would be. I don't know if we get to even have that conversation. So all I'm saying is I think we can do more. I think we shouldn't be taking more money away. We've already taken money away from the safety and some things that we all want to do from the people that have voted in supporting the schools. And I think we need to find a way, and the school needs to find a way to work within what the town can afford, and not more of these new funds go there, because I think they can get the job done. They just need to get more value out of what they've got.
Right. Just a couple of comments to clarify the process as I understand it, which is perhaps a little bit different from what you just described. Before I go into that, I would like to say that it's the policy of this committee that one-time revenues go to one-time expense. We do not fund ongoing expenses with one-time revenues. We won't do that. That's our fiscal policy that we adopted this year. That's a policy that we will hold true. That's just bad fiscal policy to behave otherwise.
I applaud that.
With respect to the timing of the budget process, the superintendent's budget is actually a precursor to the town manager's budget. It doesn't always work that way calendar-wise, but from a town charter perspective, the superintendent's budget is due, at least in summary form, before the town manager makes her recommendation. And this committee actually did a detailed review of the school committee budget. I'm surprised that you only gained access to that information last evening.
If I could clarify, if I may.
Sure.
I've got that, and that's why I thank them. They gave me the actual files so that I could do math on them of that budget, which was the 9% budget, which is now out the window, and the budget that is now proposed, the level funding budget, just came out last night. So the budget that is really going to be going to the town just came out yesterday.
Well, that's not a level funded budget. It's a level service budget.
Level service budget, I'm sorry, but the budget. as far as I'm concerned.
It's the current recommendation of the town manager. The town manager is required to submit a budget that's balanced. So we need to make our best estimate of what the revenues will be and have an expenditure budget that's in balance with that.
Right.
That's a requirement.
Right.
The town manager has to submit a balanced budget.
Right. And the budget requirement was given to the school way back then. And it hasn't changed.
There were targets given to
target
all
was
the
given.
Departments,
Right.
including the school department.
Correct.
I'm not aware of any budget or any department that met their target. And even that target was more than we could afford to spend. So we've had a confluence of events here that have taken place that bring us where we are today. We started with one expectation that led to some target budgets.
Correct.
The department heads built their budgets in an attempt to meet the target, and they expressed concern where they could not deliver the services they felt were appropriate for the town with even the target budget, let alone the recommended budget. And as we moved forward and got a better picture of revenues and expenses, the target budget actually had to be reduced in order to bring the budget in balance.
Correct.
So we started with a budget that was designed to deliver all the services that the department heads felt were appropriate, whether or not it met the recommendation or the target. And then we started the process of trying to work that down first to the target and then second to the recommendation.
Right.
It's an iterative process that we go through every year to try and reconcile.
Yeah, and I think it worked well everywhere else because I sat in the meetings, as you know, and every department came in with something that met the target, and then this is what I really could use or really need. So there was dialogue on, okay, this is what you get at the target, but this is what I think you really need. Whereas the school came in with, here's what I'd like, which was 9% versus a 3.8% target. And nothing changed until yesterday when the level service budget came out. That I believe is what's on the table now. I hope we've at least got to that point. So all I'm saying is there has been no opportunity to look at or discuss that until tomorrow night.
Actually, next Wednesday, but
I'm sorry, next Wednesday. I keep saying tomorrow night. Seems like tomorrow. It'll seem like tomorrow then. So it's hard to really address it tonight because it's fresh and there's been no discussion of what's been removed to get from 9% down to the 5%, which is still above the target.
Right,
so,
right.
That's the part of the process. I'm saying.
And part of the issue there, as I see it, is that the detail line items of the school department budget are the purview of the school committee. So the budget in aggregate is part of the total budget.
Right.
But in terms of how that money is spent, that's the purview of the school committee. And that's why it's a little bit outside of the process that we go through.
Yeah, so it's very confusing to me as a resident who's paying 60% of their tax dollars there, of how to get their arms around that if the finance committee doesn't get into the details. The finance committee makes the recommendations of things independent of that, saying the total number is okay. It doesn't give the people much opportunity other than the hearing tomorrow night, which is after your process, insight into that, and that's all I'm saying from a process point of view. It'd be nice if the school committee hearing was before this hearing, so that we better understood and could better comment on the validity or the problems or the opportunities of that number.
Right.
Not the line items, but of the number.
Yeah.
That's
Maybe that's a future consideration in terms of process, and really that's all I was trying to address. I wasn't trying to express an opinion one way or the other on the school department budget. Education is very important, but I happen to agree with you with the significant increase that we have in the tax rate this year to fund a new school. Now is not the time to be adding significantly to the FTE within the school system. I would further submit that the enrollments are still in decline. If you look at the October 1st numbers year to year, the enrollments are still declining. We look at the January enrollments, and it looks like we've added some students and seats, but that has yet to come through in the October enrollment numbers. So there's a concern there. That said, if you look individually at particular classrooms, there are 2 grades where there's a concern about the class size.
Right. Yeah.
The concern that I have is less with the teachers and more with the number of paraprofessionals that have been proposed for the budget. That to me is just not in the cards.
Right. Yeah. Thank you. Thank you for your time.
Thank you. Other comments?
The only comment, I guess, and I'm not sure how to address the available surplus, but as I listen to the discussion around the Narcan, the maintenance budget, and other ongoing expenses, and the anticipation that at some point we're going to have to be looking at stormwater, I guess I'm almost thinking that I'm still looking at this surplus not necessarily to get into operational budget items, primarily because it's surplus. There are competing issues that were presented by all of the departments, and the discussion around really trying to get a handle on what the priorities of the town are in terms of the goals and objectives, in terms of services in general from all the departments, hasn't happened yet. And I think that would bring considerable guidance to what to do in a situation where there is a potential surplus. And the confidence level being high that this is a surplus, I think there's a piece of me that wants to look at. I really, really, really don't feel comfortable financing capital items. I really, and to the extent that that can be alleviated by applying surplus there, there's just a piece of me that just, in looking at the discussions around financing some of those big, the dump truck, the backhoe, like whatever those items were, I'd almost like to see looking at the surplus as trying to address some of the capital issues that just are looking more overwhelming as the years go out. But that would be my opinion.
I guess I would have 2 comments in response to that. One is that we have talked about priorities. In fact, we've identified the pavement management plan as our top priority. Now beyond that, we haven't necessarily gone far enough in terms of where do we stand with 24/7 coverage at the public safety building? Where do we stand with respect to the police chief's request for additional officers and the fact that we're understaffed in comparison to other surrounding towns, and we've been understaffed for some time. The classroom sizes and the concerns in the school department, we need to understand those. The library is challenged with some of their energy costs going up significantly. You're right, we haven't prioritized all those things, but we do have to make some recommendations for this year's budget. I share your concern with the capital budget and borrowing to fund capital. There are circumstances where that may make sense. but we need to be very careful that the debt service isn't something that's going to crimp operating expenses going forward. So finding the right balance there is a challenge. In that regard, perhaps this is a question for the town manager. I know we have the capital budget as a separate warrant article. Would it make sense to review your recommendations around the capital before we try to take a vote on the budget?
Yeah, we certainly can do that. I can bring up a slide if you give me a minute to do that. And just to remind you, I'm hoping you're meeting again next week, so you certainly have the opportunity to finish up any discussion next week if people feel like they need time to reflect.
Might it make sense for us to begin a review of the warrant articles and maybe postpone our vote on the budget till next week?
Yeah, we can do that.
I mean, is that?
Sure, yeah.
Could you please?
May I interject just regarding, Terry, in particular, your concern about the capital budget and about mortgaging the future for capital today. It's going to sound strange, but I do share a lot of concern. Number one, the Capital Planning Committee is going to be meeting on next Tuesday at 4 o'clock in this room. And we're going to be grappling with some issues, including that, as I understand. Number two, we're working. I've worked with Jamie, and then I've shared this with Carrie and Mark, a spreadsheet that purports to at least frame to project what the cost of capital going out based on the term, the interest rate, whether or not there's a down payment, and then tally that up and see how much we would be expending in the out years. Is not trying to make an argument for or against it, but at least showing what the out year risks are for capital. The third issue is that we do have in the financial policies a ceiling beyond which we cannot reach, which sets the total debt service expenses for regular borrowing, including capital, at no more than 4% of the levy limit, 4% of the levy, not the levy limit, or 3% of the omnibus budget in any year. And the levy limit is probably the more useful metric because it's more predictable, so we can in fact project that out with some certainty and then run the numbers. So we do have some things built in that can at least protect the town a little bit. But yeah, I do share your concerns. And come on Tuesday and make your voice heard.
Thanks.
Come on down.
So the slide that's up on the wall is also very similar to what is on page 21 of your budget book. There are 10 items that are included in the capital request. The first is pavement management at $250,000. That's actually, it's a capital item, but the $250,000 is appropriated in the operating budget. The second is a 6-wheel dump truck and sander at $190,000. This is one of the 2 items proposed to be financed over a period of 3 years. Mm-hmm. Third is a backhoe at $120,000. Next, fourth is 2 marked police vehicles at $96,200. Fifth item is town hall painting at $46,200. 6 is drainage culvert repairs, $43,728. The 7th item is a feasibility study for municipal buildings at $28,000. The 8th item is intersection reconfiguration plan and implementation at $40,850. 9th is technology for town departments at $34,000, and 10 is the street sweeper at $180,000, and that's the second of 2 items proposed to be financed over 3 years. The total capital spending is $1,028,778. I mentioned $250 of that is coming from the operating budget, so the net capital article is $778,778. Not by design. But the cash outlay in fiscal 16 is $542,286, because again, we're paying making one the first of 3 payments for those 2 items. I have the town hall item highlighted. I did ask the capital committee to reconvene to reconsider that. I think that item is premature, and I'm asking them to consider a couple of other things, but it would be the same dollar amount. So there would be no increase or decrease to what's proposed in the budget. I do want to mention that the cash outlay for capital in fiscal 16 is $50,000 to $100,000 higher than what we have been spending over the last several years. So that is a concern. And originally, when I spoke at the Selectmen's meeting on Tuesday night and mentioned the additional free cash, I thought I would come back and say, here's my recommendation, and to use that, and it's to increase the capital budget and to only finance one of those 2 items. But then I thought, this is really something that the board should be discussing, much like we did last year, and you should make a determination on how we allocate those remaining funds.
Thank you. So I think it makes sense for us to withhold our discussion of the capital until after the capital planning committee has a chance to reconvene on Tuesday.
Okay, sure.
So we'll take that up next week. I would like to go back to Ms. Bertram's comments with regard to vehicle maintenance, and I think this is a question for town manager. In the preliminary recommendation, it looks like we've increased the maintenance supplies for police from $13,030 to $17,500.
Yes, that's correct.
And in fire, from $9,500 to $12,000.
Yes.
So there is some additional vehicle maintenance beyond what we had budgeted for fiscal 15.
There is. There were above target requests for fire for purchase of service, an additional $5,000. For vehicle maintenance for police, an additional $6,500, and for fuel for police, an additional amount of $6,400, for a total of just under $18,000 additional requested in vehicle maintenance. I did just go back and look. Unfortunately, I don't have the FY14 actuals handy. I do have the FY13 for vehicle maintenance in total, and we expended less than what was appropriated. I do believe in 14 we expended probably at or slightly above what was appropriated. We certainly are on target in 15 to expend slightly above what has been appropriated, but we've had some somewhat unusual expenses in fiscal 15 in vehicle maintenance for police. We're in the process of converting from the Crown Vic model to the Ford Explorer, so we have to purchase supplies for a different type. So we don't have we don't have a lot of materials or supplies on hand, parts on hand, so that is part of the expense in the current fiscal year. In the fire department, we had an issue with one of the trucks that was out of the ordinary. So I'm not saying these additional expenses aren't needed, but I think there are some specific reasons why the expenses are higher in 15 than we have seen in past years.
And to go back to the snow and ice, the budget amount is $250,000, is that correct?
260.
260.
There is a graph in the budget document on snow and ice spending. It's my favorite picture. On page 14 in the budget, there's a 10-year
Right.
history of what our expenditures are. The line on the bottom is the appropriation. The line on the top is the actual expenditure.
So we've had 8 years running now where we've expended more than $300,000.
Yes. The average expenditure over the 10-year period is $311,384, and during that time, the appropriation has typically been in $240 to $260. And then the 5-year average is $354,539.
And again, the budget for this year is $260.
$260.
There's a reason for that, though. Isn't there some, and my memory could be off, but isn't there, if we don't spend it, we don't, in each year it increases? There's something about not getting it back, or not being able,
Well, the deficit spend, if we over budget, then I think, does that constrain our ability to deficit spend in the following year?
Well, you can only deficit spend if you've appropriated the same amount. You can't cut. We couldn't go to $100,000 in 16 to solve a budget problem and then deficit spend.
So if, let's say we were to increase it, just say to 300, and then we underspent, say to 275, if we then reduce the budget to 275, would that constrain our ability to deficit spend in the following year,
Well, potentially in that 1 year.
in that 1 year?
thank you.
But the likelihood of us expending less than 300,000, I mean, it's been 9 years straight.
I'm just glad somebody
Costs are
understood my
going up.
question.
Yep. The Narcan and the Quick Clot were called out as $3,300 and $3,353. I don't think the CPR training was called out specifically. I think it was identified as 40 hours worth of training that would include CPR and Narcan refresher and some other stuff, and it was built into the base training
Yeah,
budget.
if you bear with me, I will run and get the detail on that, and I'll be right back.
As far as the stormwater, I understand the concern, but it's kind of hard to predict when that might happen, what the regulations might be. I mean, this is another one of those unfunded mandates, right? They change the legislation and don't provide any funding for it, but put requirements on us that we have no choice but to find a way to fund them. But where we sit today, we really don't know when that might happen, what the regulation might be, how much we might be required to spend against it. So that's a tough one.
I will say that was one of the places that my question regarding the potential reimbursement for the snow and ice was coming from, was that if we did at some point identify what the potential costs were around that, you know, but putting it in the budget at this point without knowing what it is hard.
I'm sorry? Do you have another?
So I do have the detail on what the police chief submitted in terms of training. The CPR, based on what I have, the CPR training is included in what has been funded. I don't see Narcan specifically called out. I did ask the police chief that earlier today, but late in the day. I should have tried to do that earlier. So I'm not 100% sure whether or not Narcan is included. I believe he said it was going to be included in the 40-hour in-service, but
Yeah.
I can confirm that.
That's the slide that I'm looking at here. The in-service and specialized training talks about CPR and first aid and says that Narcan refresher training will be combined with the CPR and first aid training.
Right. All of his training requirements, training funding were included within the budget, which is why there's such a significant increase in the police department budget, because there was an increased training requirement in fiscal 16. It actually started this year to go from 32 hours in service to 40.
Right.
And also that all of the reserve officers receive that same 40-hour in-service training where they hadn't been in the past.
Thank you, Carrie. Ms. Bertram?
Just on the Narcan, I did note the Narcan training. The 3350, I believe, is for Narcan itself. What was discussed, I believe, at the meeting was that what the chief had recommended was individual doses for each officer, because Narcan can't be left in the cruiser, so it would have to come in and out of the building constantly. So he was requesting enough for all of the officers. And if you look at that 3350 slide, he suggests 3350 for both the Quick Clot and the Narcan. What he I believe indicated was that he would purchase a Narcan kit that would then have to be transferred from car to car, and try to do that within his existing operating budget. And it just is going to be a difficult thing to manage, because every officer is going to have to remember to bring it in, and then it's going to have to be transferred to the next guy coming on. So what he was asking was for $3,350 to purchase both the Quick Clot kits and Narcan, enough for each officer. And I believe Narcan has a shelf life of, I thought he said 2 years. So it's a small investment for something that could save a life.
Right. Other comments?
One thing I did want to mention, I know that stormwater is very difficult to quantify, and this is very preliminary, and I haven't even talked with the town manager about it, but one of the things to think about, and whether or not it makes sense to even think about it for this year, it may be better to wait until see when the regulations come out and what they are. But if we truly are going to look at doing a stormwater utility, which I think is the only thing that we're going to be able to do to fund the rising costs of stormwater management, is we're going to have to invest some money in both mapping. You know, one of the things that was talked about in great detail yesterday was doing some GIS mapping to determine the percentage of impervious cover that exists in the community, because in most communities, actually in the majority of them, the utility fees are based on the amount of impervious cover on a piece of property. Additionally, understanding where we are, we did, in 2007, a study was done that the town funded because it was part of the first NIPDES permit requirement, and we did map all the outfalls and all the culverts, and I actually have looked at that back in 2009. So we have a lot of information, but getting that information into our existing GIS system So there's a lot of things that we're going to have to do, and we could begin to do now to be ready when that permit requirement comes up. But some consulting is going to need to be done, as well as some mapping, because there's a lot of work that's going to have to be done to determine does a utility make sense, and what should the rate be based on our projected costs, and for both existing infrastructure and permitting requirements, as well as we have to identify what our costs are going to be, and then we have to identify what that rate needs to be. So there's going to be some engineering and some consulting we're going to need to do.
Right. Thank you. Other comments? Okay. At this point, I'm going to table further discussion on the budget until next week. I would encourage folks to try and attend the capital planning discussion, as well as the school committee public hearing on their budget. So I'll leave it at that. Kerry, not to belabor tonight's proceedings, but would it make sense to close the public hearing and then at least start to walk through the warrant?
Yeah, I think so.
Okay. So that's what we'll do. We'll close the public hearing. We will have further discussion on the budget next week and vote on our recommendation at that time. Not necessarily looking to go through the entire warrant this evening. Maybe there are some sections that are easier than others.
Yeah, there are some that are ready for discussion.
Okay.
I have no idea what time it is. If we had a clock,
It's about 8:30.
Okay,
So why don't we allow about 30 minutes?
okay, that should be a good amount of time. So the first 6 articles of the warrant are the annual reauthorization of revolving funds. Revolving funds are special funds that we have set aside where we have user fees that are charged. They go into a revolving fund and associated expenses are paid. You can't overexpend a revolving fund that are these types of revolving funds. So the amounts that we ask you to authorize are not to exceed, but we would never expend anything unless it's already in the revolving fund. The only one that the dollar amount is different than the last year is the first one, which is the ambulance billing revolving fund. This is a fund that we put in a certain percentage of our ambulance receipts, and we use them to pay for administrative costs for the billing service and or for any costs that we have to pay for service that is provided with personnel other than ours, so paramedic services. The increase is from $50,000 to $60,000. The others are the same. We have a revolving fund for timber rights, for custodial special detail, for the Green Thumb program at the high school, library revolving fund, and the MART transportation revolving fund.
Okay. Thank you. Do I have a motion on the consent articles 1 through 6?
Motion to recommend approval?
In the second?
Second.
Thank you. Any discussion? Those in favor? Aye.
Aye.
Anyone opposed? None. 5-0.
The next article with the financial impact is Article 8. These are prior year expenses. I mentioned in the last presentation that we have 3 bills for a total of $1,782. One is for supplies that was purchased at the end of the fiscal year, and the bill was not encumbered. And the other 2 are for medical expenses for police and fire.
I'm sorry, Carrie, could you give that total amount again, please?
$1,782.
I'll make a motion to recommend approval of, do I have to go through the whole to raise and appropriate accounts?
No.
In the amount of $1,782.
Second.
Any discussion? Those in favor?
Aye.
Anyone opposed? None.
Article 9 is the fiscal 15 budget adjustment article. I have some preliminary information for you. I would not ask you to vote on this tonight. This is an article that you typically recommend to approve or hold your approval till town meeting, because we will work at this through the month of April to finalize the numbers. I can go through this for you now, or we can set it aside and see if we have time at the end, whichever is your preference.
I'd like to set it aside for now.
Okay. So then Articles 10, 11, 12, and 13 are collective bargaining agreements that they are not ready for approval tonight. We have 2 agreements that have been approved and will be up for town meeting approval. Payroll is still calculating what the dollar is. So we will set these aside, and maybe even at your next meeting, well, not next week, but your first meeting in April, we can take these up.
Okay.
Article 14 is the capital plan, and we just went through that. You heard that the capital planning committee is meeting on next week, on Tuesday.
Tuesday.
So you probably would like to set this one aside as well.
Yep.
Article 15 is the appropriation to the stabilization fund to maintain the 5% balance. I think even though you have the amount, I think you probably would like to keep this and vote it when you vote the budget, just in case there are any changes.
Yep.
Then 16 is the fiscal 16 budget. 17 is the sewer enterprise fund, and I would ask that you hold this for now until next week. We might have one slight adjustment to the presentation that you received, a slight increase in indirect costs. So I need to confirm that, but we can take that up probably next week. 18 is the solid waste disposal enterprise fund. The request is for a budget of $265,000. I believe you have a one-page sheet that shows what the costs have been over a number of years. The program is self-funding. The projection for fiscal 16 is slightly under 265. I just rounded it up to make it easy. There's no increase proposed in bag fees for this program. We haven't had any since the inception, I believe, 5 years ago.
And what's the impact of the adjustment that was made to the recycling?
There's no impact to the enterprise fund. This is the pay-per-throw program, and the adjustment was to the recycling program, two separate programs.
Okay. Do I have a motion on Article 18?
Motion to recommend approval in the amount of, well, actually, I don't have, because the amount's already in there. so,
265, yeah, that's fine.
So, motion to recommend approval.
Second.
Any discussion? Those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Anyone opposed? 5-0.
Article 19 is the Lunenburg Water Department Water Enterprise Fund. The request is for a budget of $25,000. I'm not sure if you have that in yours. I'm working with with an older copy. $25,000 is the budget for the current fiscal year. It's what's proposed for next year. The Lunenburg Water Department has 5 customers. It's a very small service area. The $25,000 is, usually we don't spend anything. This is in the event that there was some issue, there was some repair that needed to be made to the infrastructure. We like to have something available. But again, we haven't expended anything out of this probably in the entire time I've worked for the town.
But we still have the amount of 25,000, and that's not changing.
That's not changing, and that is coming from that enterprise fund.
Right.
We, these customers receive their water from the city of Fitchburg, so we charge the city of Fitchburg's rate plus a certain percentage over that for administration and maintenance of the system.
Right. Do I have a motion on Article 19?
I make a motion that we invest $25,000 in the account.
Recommend approval?
Approval.
In a second?
Second?
Any discussion? Those in favor? Aye.
Aye.
Anyone opposed? None.
Articles 20, 21, 22, and 23 are articles that were submitted by the police chief, various amendments to existing bylaws or new bylaws relative to public safety issues with no financial impact.
Okay.
Articles 24 and 25 are requesting authorization from town meeting to approve utility easements over school property relative to the school construction project. The school committee has either granted or is in the process of granting license agreements, which are a temporary substitute for easements. License agreements are revocable but can be granted either by the school committee or board of selectmen. Easements can only be approved by town meeting and they're permanent. So these also have no financial impact. Article 26 is and I will need to get you the exact amount, but this is an article relative to the financing of the school construction project. We have done the lion's share of borrowing for that project. As a result of the borrowing, we received premiums for the project, and we had the opportunity either to use the premium to help pay the debt service, which is what we did forever before, or now we have the opportunity to take that premium and apply it directly to the project, reducing the total borrowing. And so the Board of Selectmen decided, I believe back in December, that we would use the premium to directly offset the borrowing. So we're not going to borrow that amount. In order to complete this transaction, we have to have town meeting rescind the borrowing authorization in the same amount as the premium that we received.
Would we reduce the existing borrowing, or would we use this to reduce the future borrowing?
The future borrowing. So we have borrowed a significant amount, but not 100%.
Right.
So to reduce the future borrowing.
And has that already been authorized?
Yeah, the project has been authorized in its entirety.
The total amount, right.
Right, but we've borrowed, I want to say 30 million, and we have a remaining amount to wait to get to the end of the project to see what our actual costs and reimbursement are.
Right. So if we're waiting until the end of the project to authorize that borrowing, that's the borrowing that would be reduced. What is it that would be rescinded?
So the project, the total authorization was for $70-something million. We are reducing that authorization by the same amount of the premium.
Got it.
And I will get you the amount of the premium for the next meeting.
Okay.
It's really confusing. I
Yeah,
wanted-
we'll wait until we have a
Till we have
number.
the amount?
I wanted them to do the other thing, because I can't wait to try to explain this at town meeting.
Well, you did a good job practicing here.
So the next several articles are planning board articles. 27 is the Architectural Preservation District, which I would assume you would determine has no financial impact.
No direct impact.
No direct impact. 28 is the Village Center District.
There aren't any fees or licensing or any other sorts of revenue attached to any of this, right?
Nothing special.
Nothing special.
To
So whatever
this.
permitting is ordinary, that same would apply here.
Yes. 29, 30, 31, 32, 33, and 34 are all articles. They are wording adjustments if the Architectural Preservation District and the Village Bylaw District are approved, changes that need to be made to the existing, to language in the existing bylaw to reference appropriate sections.
So no impact on any of those.
35 and 36 are requests to designate roads as scenic roads under Mass General Law, Chapter 40, Section 15C, Flat Hill Road and Northfield Road.
Does that have any financial implication?
There was a question at the Board of Selectmen's meeting relative to, would there be grants available or something like that? So I'm gathering that information. No direct financial impact, but maybe the opportunity to obtain some grant funding for improvements to these roads.
But it does not obligate the town to do anything special with Flat Hill or Northfield Road.
I don't believe so, but I will make a note to ask that question.
Thank you.
Okay, so we'll hold on those.
Article 37 is a request to accept Whitetail Crossing as a public road.
I think we've talked about that in the past, right? When we accept a public road, there is some impact to the town, albeit pretty minimal.
Yes. So if you would like, I can have somebody come in and speak on that article. Or if you would like to see a copy of the plan, it should be on file. Once this is finished, it will be on file in the town clerk's office.
John?
I just wondered how long, I probably should know this, having lived here for 30 years, how long Whitetail Crossing is.
Is that off of Burridge?
It is.
It is.
Yeah, I couldn't tell you off the top of my head. I should know, but this is a newly constructed road in a new subdivision. It went through a pretty extensive review process. The planning board applied a number of criteria, a number of things that needed to be done to make sure that it's up to standards before we accept it.
It would, however, obligate us to plow the road.
To plow it, and to maintain
maintain
it.
it.
Yeah.
Stormwater.
Which means 20 years from now, we'll be repaving it. Seriously.
Yeah.
Seriously.
That soon?
Yeah.
Well,
So this is,
we'll be talking about repaving it in 20
Yeah,
years.
it'll be on the list.
If nothing else, I think knowing the length of the road might be meaningful for us.
Okay. Article 38 is a request to rezone a piece of property from commercial to limited business residential. Parcel 8 on Assessor's Map 59 and Parcel 9 on Assessor's Map 59. This is the Stone Farm.
That's the one we just
April 13th.
announced the public hearing on, right?
Yeah.
I guess same question there. Does that change any of the permitting or licensing fees?
It would not, but it would change what would be allowed by right to be developed on the property.
Is there any potential legal issues down the road associated with that? No.
Nothing out of the, you mean, does the
It's not
town?
going to anticipate any legal costs over in the next,
As a result of the rezoning?
yeah.
Well, I mean,
Be some.
I don't know what to do with that question.
Yeah, there'll
The
be
only
some.
that's the reason I ask is that whether or not somebody would see that as,
An issue to challenge?
yes.
I did ask the land use director, about that. Does the town have the right to just rezone property? And it does.
And in and of itself, there's no direct financial impact.
No, but it would change what you could develop by right, and some proposed development may be controversial, so indirectly.
Okay, no, I was just, given that it had been recently the subject of many hearings, I wasn't sure.
Yeah. Unless anyone disagrees, I'm going to say no direct
Yeah.
financial impact.
Yeah, I would agree.
Article 39 is authorization to design, bid, permit, and construct an extension to the sewer system on Pleasant View Ave. This is a betterment project, so paid 100% through betterments levied against the adjacent properties.
Has the sewer commission made their recommendation, or do they make a recommendation? They submitted it, right?
They did. Sewer Commission, did you approve this? The Sewer Commission?
Recommending approval of this?
And the project is covered in entirety by the betterments. Yep. Do I have a motion on Article 39?
Before I probably would make the motion, but I just need to understand a little better. $300,000, that is, the town puts the $300,000 and then is repaid by the sewer commission as betterments come in, or how does that work?
It kind of. First, before we do any extension, we require a two-thirds support of it by the people who will be bettered. So the two-thirds of the people on that street, which is, I think it's about 12 total, supported this, which is why we voted to go forward with it. The betterment, we will get loans, the town will go out to get loans. We're trying to get this as a modification on the SRF loans for the current extension that was approved last year. But if we don't, then we'll go for separate loans for the $300,000. And then when the project is complete and all the costs are known, then it'll be divided. It'll be determined what the cost per resident will be, and then it'll be paid by them either initially, completely, or spread over 20 years. And actually is included in the tax bill, although it's a separate fund.
I guess let me sharpen the question a little bit. Just
Try to sharpen the answer.
your answer was fine. Is there any taxpayer money involved with this at all?
No.
No. Okay, thanks. Well, yeah.
Well, that said, we are taking on the project on the assumption that we're going to be paid back that money.
Yeah.
So there is, if nothing else, a cash flow consideration.
Yeah.
Actually, two considerations then: cash flow immediately and certain, and then just a little element of risk, right?
Yeah,
Okay.
right.
And I gather from that there is a definite need on the part of these residents, Carl, for this service.
Yeah.
Yes, this area was in the comprehensive wastewater plan. This area was identified as an area of need. Matter of fact, it was an area of need with the first sewer, but they just never got to it. So this is an area of need per the CWMP, Comprehensive Wastewater Plan, and that's why we're going forward, because they are in the sewer service area.
Thanks.
Okay.
I'll make a motion to recommend approval.
Second.
Any discussion? Those in favor? Aye.
Aye.
Anyone opposed? None.
The next article is the Police Special Detail Fund. We talked about this under the budget adjustments. The request is to appropriate $10,000 to this fund.
I'd make the motion to recommend approval to appropriate $10,000 for the police special fund.
Second.
Thank you. Any discussion?
Where's the 10K coming from?
It's part of the, it's not part of the operating budget, but part of the financial plan for 16 that's been presented.
Okay.
Any other discussion? Those in favor? Aye.
Aye.
Anyone opposed? None.
Article 41 is a request to authorize a reserve capacity stabilization fund for the sewer enterprise fund. This would be a fund to set aside capacity fees that are paid in order to purchase future capacity either from the city of Leominster or the city of Fitchburg.
So this being a special reserve fund, 2/3 to vote money in and 2/3 to vote money out?
Yes, because it's a stabilization, and I didn't mention the dollar amount. So establishing the fund and appropriating $617.10, which is the sum total of what has been collected as reserve capacity fees by the Sewer Enterprise Fund.
Right.
John has a question.
Yeah, $610.70 isn't a lot of money. Is there a chance that this could involve several tens of thousands or hundreds of thousands of dollars? And I've got a follow-up question then if the answer is yes.
Yeah, we expected to. The $617 was what we had collected through the end of last fiscal year. Through this year, we will collect money. We project we'll probably collect, based on the connections that our budget's based on, 25 connections. We're expecting to collect about $14,000 this year.
Yeah.
We haven't had to start paying Fitchburg yet. We have an agreement with Fitchburg that once they start the construction of the expansion, we'll have to, our loan essentially with them will be $18,000 a year. Mm-hmm. So if they don't start this year, then we would expect at the end of this fiscal year, 15, that we will put another $14,000 in. And we will keep putting in until the payments are due to Fitchburg. And then we will have to pay them $18,000 a year. Once that happens, we probably won't be building that account anymore until after the payments to Fitchburg are done. But then they would continue for the next capacity need.
The only minor concern has to do, this is a town stabilization fund, has to do with the limit we set for total stabilization funds of 10%, I think, of the levy limit. This will not approach this, but just sort of, we got to remember that that's a speed limit we have to be concerned about.
Right,
That's
right. Given that we're at 5 and looking to restore to 5, I think 10% is pretty safe.
We're safe fine, but yeah, and particularly the nature of this where it's in and out.
Right.
You know, so.
I just want to clarify that stabilization fund that's being established for the sewer enterprise should not be taken into account as part of the town's general stabilization funds, because it's specifically for the enterprise fund. if
Yep.
they, because they're collecting revenues that they want to reserve for future payments, the only way that they can do that under Mass General laws is to establish this enterprise fund. But the revenues that go in will be enterprise revenues. And when the money comes out to pay the city of Fitchburg, it'll, it's enterprise revenue that went in, it's enterprise revenue that will come out and go to the city of Fitchburg or Leominster or whatever town it needs to go to.
So if I could just rephrase this, the distinction is that this is collecting money and putting it into a stabilization fund in anticipation of future payments, which distinguishes it from a special purpose or dedicated stabilization fund.
Well, I think the dedication is that it's enterprise versus general fund. The other stabilization funds that we have are general stabilization funds for the town. This stabilization fund, the only way that the sewer commissioners have the ability to reserve the revenues that they're collecting now, that would be for future payments, is to establish this stabilization fund. But it's an enterprise stabilization fund. So when you're calculating your levels of stabilization, you should only take into account the general stabilization funds and not this fund.
We may want to sharpen up the language a little bit. I'd have to go back to
We should go back and look at it. But I think what Karen's arguing is that it's a separate revenue stream, separate expenditure stream, therefore it's an entirely separate stabilization.
So I'm off on a tangent, I understand that.
We
but-
just need to check our wording to make sure that, Yep. Thank you, Karen. So do I have a recommendation or a motion on Article 41?
Make a motion that we establish this stabilization fund for the collection money, special stabilization fund, the collection of money for the reserve capacity associated with the sewers.
You're going to state that as you're going to recommend.
Oh, I'm going to make a motion.
The motion, you're going to make a motion to recommend.
No, I'm going to make a motion to recommend that we
Yes.
adopt, yes. Okay. Thank you.
Motion is that we
As
recommend
As written.
approval
Yeah.
for the stabilization fund.
Yeah, no, that was,
Yeah,
and
for the sewer
was that
department.
already seconded? Because I'm happy to second that.
It hasn't.
It is now.
But I wanted to make sure I was seconding the motion to
Yeah.
recommend.
Right.
Thank you.
Any further discussion? Those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Anyone opposed? None. Kerry, I'm fine to cut it off here and take up the remaining articles
Okay.
when we meet next week.
Sure.
I've confirmed that we do have a quorum for next week. Do we have a venue? Can we meet here?
I will double check. I'm almost positive you are able to do that.
Okay.
Can I just ask one question of Karen before we stop? And actually, that had to do with the spreadsheet that we received regarding the past year's appropriations.
Regarding the what?
The past year's actuals, the actual expenditures. I just wanted to know, were those expenditures that were listed by the line items, were those before there were any transfers?
I'm not sure. In the budget document?
Is that where that was?
No, it was a separate document.
It was something that Carrie that you had sent us, that you had a report showing 3 years of actuals and then the current year-to-date
No.
expenditures.
Well, there would have only been budgeted. The only transfers that would have been posted would have been to the actual budget, the original appropriations. But the spreadsheets, if they're the ones that I'm thinking of, those should have just been actual expenditures from year to year.
Right, they were actual expenditures year to year, and they had nothing to do with the transfers between, departmental transfers at the end of the year. Those were not part of those.
They would have been net of any actuals at the end of the year. Any transfers at the end of the year would be reflected in the actuals. What we were trying to resolve is, in the preliminary budget recommendation, the prior years are appropriated
Right.
amounts. And what we wanted to see were the actual amounts for those years. So the actual would be the final actual amount after all transfers.
Okay. Well, I was just trying to figure out if I was reading it as if that, because I guess, because the question goes to those, there were some that if they were fully expended, they may not have been fully expended for what they said they were going to be fully expended for, if indeed it was after the transfers had occurred.
Well, I think part of the problem is that you can't see the budget, you can only see the actual expenditures.
Exactly.
So you don't know what their actual expenditures were compared to the budget. But I can tell you that if I were to give you a year-end report that showed the budget and the actual expenditures, it would reflect all transfers, because before we close the year, we have to get everything in balance. So it would include any transfers that are authorized by department heads, as well as any the year-end transfers that the FinCom authorizes and that the Board of Selectmen authorize. Those would be included in the final budget amounts as well as the final expenditure amounts. The final budgeted amounts would include all the transfers to get to the budget that reflects the actual expenditures.
That piece was fine, because actually now I'm thinking that one of the reasons why I had a question triggered was that the reserve account that the Finance Committee has some access in terms of how that's expended didn't have any expenditures.
So it's showing a zero balance, which means that it had all been either reappropriated or transferred elsewhere.
Okay.
So we spend our money every year.
I know that. I was basically just looking at it in terms of, okay, so if it says that they spent $15,000, did they really spend $15,000, or did they spend $5,000 and $10,000 went someplace else? That's what I wasn't sure in terms of how I was reading that. So that if,
In effect, our budget shows zero because those monies were transferred to other line items.
No, I know, but there were also other departmental lines, but, where there were departmental transfers where, I mean, it's probably way too specific.
Actuals are actuals, in my view.
Well, no, actuals are actual, it was actually expended, but it wasn't actually expended by me. So in my line, I had a $15,000 budget, I spent $5,000, and you had a $10,000 overage, and it went to your line.
Right.
So it shows on the budget as we both just spent what we were supposed to spend.
No, you spent $5,000 and I spent $10,000. When I look at a budget,
I
you
mean,
were $10,000 under budget, I was $10,000 over budget.
except that what it shows that I expended and what I may need next year is going to be more or less than what I actually, do you know what I mean? Never, It's too late, Bob knows what I mean, so I'm feeling, and I shouldn't be picking on you so soon after you.
Tom's giving you the eye over there.
But no, that was, that was, all. I'm gonna stop.
Sure.
I'm sure.
Okay, so we tabled our recommendation on the budget. We went through many of the moneyed articles. We have a couple where we need more information. We have a few that we didn't get to. I have an outline of our report, but until we fill in some of this information, it's really not meaningful. But I will bring a draft to our meeting next week.
Great.
That we can take a look at and hopefully be close to finalizing. Okay? John, I believe we have minutes from last week.
We do. It's a collaborative effort, of course.
And I was not here, so.
I think it passes muster, right?
We good?
I think so.
Do I have a motion?
Was it Jay
Can I
that
see
made
that?
Sure.
Yep.
Okay, so you did confirm it.
I connected with Jay and got the verbiage I needed.
Awesome.
Okay,
What was the name from last week? What was last week's date?
19th.
So a motion to approve the minutes from the March 19th meeting.
I think that was John.
Second?
Any discussion? Those in favor?
Aye.
Oh, I can't vote.
Correct.
Right. Did I
Right.
get 4 votes? No
Yes.
one's opposed, right?
Nope.
Okay. Do we have any department updates?
No.
The Building Reuse Committee was going to meet last week. We could not have a quorum. So we'll be meeting, I believe, the beginning of April. 6th, April 6th.
The building reuse, the next meeting will be April 6th.
Yep. Building
Great,
reuse.
thanks.
Okay?
Just wanted, Mark, to interject that the library trustees will meet on Wednesday, April 1st, to go over the library budget. I will be there.
Okay. Okay, so we will be plugging in a special meeting on April 2nd. And the purpose of that meeting will be to finalize our budget recommendation and complete our warrant article review and finalize our report that goes with the warrant. We don't have to decide tonight, but we can consider skipping our meeting of April 9th in lieu of meeting on the 2nd. Okay? Anything else for tonight?
Well done.
I'll take a motion to adjourn.
Motion to adjourn.
Second.
Discussion? None? Those in favor? Aye.
Aye.
None opposed. I have 9:11. Thank you all, and good night.
9/11?
9/11.
9/11, thank you very much. Wow.